fresh air, and we'll resume the program.
I will.
So let me move into phase 2. I mentioned the importance of these policy reforms, but phase 2 is where I want to talk about these regional councils, especially with Amy here, as I say, and the new system for guiding and delivering economic development services in the state. There are 3 key initiatives here: the Regional Economic Development Councils, something called the Consolidated Funding Application, CFA. Folks will note that this is a new way to access state resources. And then something brand new, which we're just starting, which is a new marketing campaign for the state under the governor's direction called Open for Business. To fundamentally change New York's operating model for economic development and to generate sustainable economic growth and employment opportunities across the state, Governor Cuomo recently created 10 regional economic development councils. Now, the 10 councils are supported by at least $1 billion in existing state resources. See, that's 17 funding programs from 9 different state agencies, including ours at ESD, all pulled together, all those resources put on the table, so these regional economic development councils have access to them. And the councils empower individual regions, there are 10 that have been set up all across the state, to chart their own course for job creation and economic growth by designing community-based, performance-driven strategies for economic development. The regional plans, each of the 10 regions has to develop, and some of you I'm sure are following the one here for our Mid-Hudson region. Again, Amy Vargas is in charge, so see her after the meeting. But each regional council, the councils have between 25 and 30 people on each one. Each one has an executive director who, as I said before, is the ESD regional director of the corresponding region. These regions already existed, they already mapped out. We didn't make up new regions. In fact, they're the same regions the Department of Labor uses and Empire State Development uses. So we use the existing resources, lest anyone think there's new bureaucracy forming here. We wouldn't want that. The governor wouldn't allow that. So it's existing agency staff from state government agencies like ESD, Department of Labor, Department of State, the existing regions, and the rest, volunteers, lots and lots of volunteers. Each of the regional councils has to work on a plan that emphasizes the region's unique assets, economic development assets. Each has to harness local expertise, that's really the leadership and the volunteers, the council members, and they have to develop a 5-year strategic plan for the region, right? Chart a competitive, compelling economic development plan specific to that region. Each has to identify policy reforms to eliminate barriers to growth. As an example, our Finger Lakes Regional Council, which is run by Bob McNary, one of our colleagues who's in Rochester, they've got a lot of agriculture. Obviously, there's quite a lot of agriculture here as well, but in Finger Lakes, it's different from Western New York or different from the North Country. So they might cite certain regulations. I'll just mention perhaps DEC or labor or other state agency regulations that affect the life of farmers or people in agriculture in that region. So each region is going to be asked to do that. What are the taxes, the burdens, the regulations that are specifically in your region? They're getting in the way of your region's economic development future, as you see it. And then we'll look for those common themes all across the state in these 10 plans to highlight areas that need reform and deliver that message to the governor and work with our legislative partners. And finally, each one of these economic development regions, each one of these plans, has to advance priority projects. Let's go back to the importance of key projects, transformational projects, that are identified by the local stakeholders, right, the council members, and that demonstrate the greatest potential for job creation and economic development in the area. So when these regional councils got started, let's face it, quite a number of projects were already in the pipeline. We called a timeout. We asked the regional stakeholders, wait, this isn't about Ken Adams or even the governor or Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy, who's in charge of this whole system, deciding which projects matter. This is you decide which projects matter. Stakeholders at the local level literally have to rank, they have to prioritize key projects, in this case for our Mid-Hudson region. And so that we take direction in terms of the allocation of precious state dollars of very limited state resources. The direction doesn't come from us, it's not a top-down, this is turned upside down on its head. It comes from the local regions. And the purpose, as you can imagine, of the councils is to replace the sort of one-size-fits-all, Albany-driven development strategy of the past with a new plan, a new strategy that really incentivizes what I talked about before, performance and results. And each council also has to come up with a set of metrics, with a system for measuring every year the effectiveness of the project, what value are taxpayers getting from those investments in those projects in that region. So it's like a dashboard or a metric system, and there'll be public, obviously, annual reports on each one of the 10 regional councils. Now the councils include the people, if you're wondering who's doing all this, other than our staff, like I say, Amy, we're really this is all driven by community volunteers. And they're drawn from business, academic, labor, agriculture, nonprofits, community-based organizations, all local stakeholders who continue to meet regularly. There are 6 scheduled meetings and then many others that are occurring, including forums for public participation. And Amy reminded me in the recent break that the forum for public participation in the regional council plan for this, the Mid-Hudson region, is tomorrow night at SUNY Ulster at what time?
5:30.
At 5:30. And I bet if you called Amy later or went to the website, you can get more details. But that is one of several of the public participation sessions. By the way, every council has, again, 6 mandatory meetings, and then everyone is required to do, however they see fit, they determine the right way to get community input into their plan. Plans are due November 14th. So what's that, Amy, a couple months from now? Only about 8 weeks left. The plans get turned in the 14th, and then the governor's going to form a special committee of people who aren't involved in the system. People will be drawn in who are not interested parties in what's called the Strategic Plan Review Committee to review all 10 plans and to score them and to make awards of $200 million in capital funding and Excelsior tax credits that will be divided up by the end of the year and distributed to the plans based on the quality of the plans, their thoughtfulness, their competitiveness. So this all unfolds over the next several months. Now, in addition, in New York State, this is a new thing for allocating the resources out to projects called the CFA. And I think this is online now, and for folks who are really curious, you can check it out on the governor's website, on our website, but it's called the New York State Consolidated Funding Application. You know, again, I said before, the $1 billion the governor's put on the table, made available for economic development for regional councils, comes from 9 state agencies and 17 funding streams. You know, a couple months ago, if you wanted to get access to some of that money for your project, it could be pretty complicated. Some people are you know, you have to figure out the program, how to get there. There may be consultants who are experts in this in the room, and this was a good thing for the consultancy business. Because to figure out how to do the applications and apply and get the money, and how do I do this from these 17 programs and 9 agencies, let's just say it wasn't the most user-friendly system in the world. And the governor said, again, no, let's go turn that on its head. Put all of those funding programs, all those rules, all that craziness in one place and simplify it. So a nonprofit, a little league, an economic development project, a county official, a local official, anyone with a project that is relevant for that funding, right? It has to be, the funding has to fit it. Go to one place online, this thing called the CFA, and at least do the initial paperwork there online and see if you qualify and see if you got a chance of getting some support. So it, again, opens the door up and makes it much more user-friendly. Finally, the last thing I mentioned is this marketing campaign, and this I'll use as a segue to the closing remarks I want to make about the flooding. The governor is convinced that we really need to work on the state's image beyond the state's borders with respect to investors and business owners from around the country and really around the world. So, you know, what's that about? I mean, he is as mindful as we are that New York State has the highest taxes, or some of the highest taxes in the nation. He's as mindful as we are that over time the state's developed a reputation for not exactly being the most business-friendly place in the world. You see this in his remarks. You saw this when the governor introduced the budget and his pledge to not raise taxes during the budget process by saying, this was in kind of the money quote in the New York Times article right above the fold the next day, New York State has no economic future as the tax capital of the nation. That's Governor Andrew Cuomo. So that view, that's out there, and we've got to do something about it. Now, you just can't make up a campaign. You have to put these reforms in place that I mentioned earlier. You have to develop a new rational system of community, locally driven economic development strategies through regional councils. You have to simplify the process for the allocation of state resources. You have to make things happen. You have to tell a story. But when you've got a better story to tell, this really is a great state. Let's be a little more chamber-like here, right? So there really is a lot to talk about, a lot of good things that we should be harnessing as economic development assets of the state. It's natural beauty, it's higher education institutions, it's existing legacy of great industrial companies, large and small. It's people, it's workforce generally well regarded, 19 million people, 62 counties. I mean, there is a huge economic infrastructure. Never mind the city. New York City itself is really a world capital in finance and other industries. So there are tremendous assets that need to be leveraged so that we can tell a story that attracts new investment into New York from around the country and around the globe. And so the governor is teeing up a new marketing campaign called Open for Business. We've done an RFP, we'll be hiring an ad agency, serious professional help to shape messages in the months and years ahead around telling a new story. And as the governor says, telling people, we're making these changes, Albany gets it, we're on your side, we want your investment, it's a new New York, and indeed we're open for business. So there'll be a campaign shortly that will start to get at that. So that's the review that I promised. Now a piece of, and an update on regional councils, which is so timely, I wanted to, and with Amy here, I really wanted to touch on it. County Executive Hine was asking me this before he had to leave to do an event, and Senator Bonasek as well. Both of them, you saw them, you know, kibitzing, whispering to each other about the flooding, because both have sent me with very, very helpful suggestions to meet with companies that they know in the area that are in trouble. And so I've been out on the road, actually going back to a meeting that Amy and I had with the County Executive's Office the first week when we came up to meet with people in agriculture and tourism and other businesses that have been devastated by the flooding in Ulster County. And so several things. One is we've done a lot of outreach, and we're still doing it, to identify specific industries, but also individual businesses that have really suffered serious losses as a result of the flooding, that they're, in many cases, obviously their insurance doesn't cover, and people are really in tough shape. And we are continuing to do that outreach to get the stories and to know case by case what we've got to deal with. You know, unfortunately, just like folks were caught by surprise by the extensive flooding, as an agency, we were caught by surprise in some levels too by the extensive needs. And while we have some really good programs like Excelsior or the NYSERDA programs, or some of our other day-to-day economic development tools, we don't have a tool on the shelf that says, in case of severe flooding, here's what you do to help a business. I mean, we weren't, in that regard, I just say we weren't at ESD so prepared ourselves. But we've been doing that outreach, and we've been making sure that the federal government, and Governor Cuomo has been really pushing hard, you might have seen this yesterday, for more and more federal support. So for example, the SBA loan programs, we're making sure people apply for that when that makes sense. We're making sure people get all the assistance from FEMA they should be getting. And then the governor himself, where he wrote a letter to President Obama yesterday asking for more support for individuals and for businesses. And so there's a lot that's being worked on several fronts, but I just wanted to reflect on something that was brought to my attention in the meeting with the county executive. It became immediately clear to me that a serious issue, and I suspect there are chamber members ward for whom this may be the case, for this area is in fall tourism. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I am concerned, and we say this with the doors closed, and the media don't report this because we want to be practical here. No, seriously, I'm concerned that people may have people down in the city who in the fall come up for apple picking, for the foliage, the leaf peepers, the foliage trips, the bed and breakfast visitors, the kids in the pumpkin patch. That some of those folks down in the city may have seen a lot of gloom and doom on the news, right, with flooding and with damage, and maybe thinking, oh, I'm not going to Catskills. We'll go to Connecticut, or we'll go to, I don't know if that's the case, and I don't certainly want to put that out there publicly, so this isn't too bad. But we got to make sure that people in the city and around the region know that Ulster County, that the Catskills, that Kingston is open for business, and that things are great and things are as beautiful as they always were, and that people should stick with their plans and come up, and if anything, come up and spend money and have a good time and do what they always do. And so we're going to be doing a special version of our, we run the I Love New York campaign at ESD. So we're going to do a special promotional campaign with I Love New York soon. I was looking at a draft copy for radio ads over the weekend to make sure people know that Ulster County and the Hudson Valley in general, and other areas, frankly, like Essex County and the Adirondacks, that everybody's open for fall tourism business and it's beautiful, and places are wonderful, and come up and spend your money. Now, how about that word for a chamber minute? Come on up and spend your money. And I hope that, in its own simple way, I hope our use of I Love New York and a special effort in this regard, Ward, is helpful. But certainly, in the coming days and weeks, let me know, Ward, what else, and Senator Bonsack, anything else we can do at ESD to help businesses and communities recover from the devastation caused by Irene and Lee. All right, thank you all very much for your attention this morning. Ward, are we good?
Sure. Questions?
All right.
Questions?
All right. Yeah, Ward says we have time for a couple questions. It's his show, so, sir.
Tom Collins.
Hi. I was glad to see you continue to up the funding for the Excelsior project, but it's really an anemic successor to the Empire Zone. And the Empire Zone really saved this area after IBM downsized in the mid-early 90s. And we find, I'm in the commercial real estate business. I'm also past chair of the Ulster County Development Corporation, so I've been involved for 25 years in this area. We really lose a lot to our neighboring states who have more aggressive programs than we have, and Excelsior is really not very competitive. Case in point, in fact, in a couple weeks, a 65-job company will be leaving Kingston to go to Scranton. It's a story we've seen over and over again. And frankly, they didn't want to leave. They were tripling their size, and but the economics were so compelling of the incentives and the tax structure that they really felt they had to go. And this is a story I've seen over and over again. And so if you could just comment on maybe programs, enhancements, so we could be more competitive. And I just wanted to say, unless Empire State Development can be involved in secret reform, we're really going to be beating your head against the wall.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's something you hear all over the place, but if we get the DEC and secret reform under control, we go a long way to being more competitive on the regulatory side.
So let me work backwards, Tom.
Okay, thanks.
Because we've started, I totally agree with you on the need for secret reform. We hear it all across the state. It's a great example of the power of these 10 regional councils to echo, secret reform, secret reform. You hear 10, so that's happening. And in fact, it happened earlier before we even started the regional council. So at ESD, we got together with a group including people obviously from DEC, and we have a secret reform task force, and we'd actually really welcome your practical suggestions with your experience for that. So we're working on that. Again, I take that on as an ESD, it's interesting, as an ESD responsibility to advocate for the reform in a sister agency, maybe because of my own experience in the Business Council and working with Ward and with chambers and with people like yourself. So, and I know that we have a good ally for reforms like that in Senator Bonsack. So secret reform, yes, we've got to do it. Brownfields reform, why not add that to the list? The state's again a DEC program. Now Joe Martin's the DEC commissioner, very open to this. Terrific guy. I mean, we're all new, and we're going to do what we can do. And I've already met with him and talked about the need for this. I agree with you that Excelsior, in some cases, is a limited economic development tool. I was, over the years, a big supporter of Empire Zones in my prior jobs. We all know the story. I mean, it grew to be a very big program. It was costing taxpayers $600 million a year when there were 10,000 companies getting Empire Zone benefits. So it grew to be so big, everybody was an Empire Zone. I think this table was an Empire Zone, the room was an Empire Zone, Ward's house was an Empire Zone. The thing, it really was expansive. It just got out of control, and it was shut down. And it was replaced with something much more focused. Limited, but very focused on key industries. And I should say for folks, a very important thing about the Excelsior program is that it's a tax credit program, but you don't get it unless you create the jobs. We don't front money anymore to people. So you come up to us with a project and you say you're going to build an expansion on your plant, and you're going to add 57 jobs, and you're going to spend $10 million in expansion, and you want $1 million in Excelsior tax credits, or what it's by formula. There's a range. We have some discretion. So we do an offer. We offer you that, and then we wait and wait and wait. It doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime. And then you have a timeline for your project, and you come back to us 2 years later and say, look, the construction's done. I hired the people. Business is good. Here's my payroll records. We audited it. Here are the people that I hired. Here's what they get paid. We audit that. We check it out. And if you complete the deal, again, it could be 2-3 years later, we give you the tax credit. This is about the integrity of the program, protecting the taxpayer. To some people in business, right, folks we all know, folks I know and work with, that's not as friendly as the old program. That's not it. Now, on the other hand, the old program got out property taxes. In most cases, the Empire Zone credit was really a credit against property taxes, which are, we don't have to say it again in this room, property taxes are so high compared to other states, so off the charts. I often say property tax structure in New York State is, you have to compare New York to another planet, which we haven't found yet, and not even another state. And it's just detrimental to our economic development efforts, because when Tom tries to get a company to come here, they look at their energy bill. Tony knows that's sticker shock, not his fault. It's a whole other story. They look at property tax bill, that's the sticker shock. They can look at a couple other things, and it makes it really hard. And so what do we tend to do? We say, well, that's a wall around the state, let's lower the wall. So we would lower the wall with the Empire Zone program by providing an offset on property taxes. It made it a very useful, Tom, I totally agree, a very attractive and very helpful incentive. But for those reasons, again, we just don't have that tool anymore. So I would argue that at least the property tax cap, over time, raise your hand if that lowered your taxes. It hasn't. It's just supposed to slow the rate of growth, right, at 2%. But over time, that's a step in the direction of getting property taxes under control, and ultimately, I would hope lowering them, although that's a local government issue to a large degree, because we have to be more tax competitive. So that's a long way of saying I agree with you about the limitations, and I agree with you about the value of the former program, but this is the world we live in today. I think there's transparency and value for taxpayers with these programs. And yeah, quite honestly, and I couldn't blame you if you felt this way, this guy, Ken Adams, has less of your money to give to companies. So what we do has to be focused and disciplined, again, with integrity and with real results for taxpayers. Yes?
Okay.
Sorry, one more.
Yeah, last one.
Lance Madison with Ulster County Development Corporation. First of all, Ken, I think when I came here 4 years ago to start doing economic development in New York.
Where'd you come from, Lance?
I came down from Vermont.
Uh-huh.
And by the way, I thought that Vermont was the greenest, most cumbersome.
It's the Green Mountain State.
And until I became introduced to Seeker, and I found that it was more open-ended, more indefinite. So I applaud your efforts there. I also applaud.
Don't applaud yet. We have to get it done.
I also applaud I said applaud your efforts. So that's an important first step. Also, the tax cap. 4 years ago, the attitude was so cynical and so defeatist on property tax reform that you couldn't get anybody to believe that it was even feasible. The atmosphere has measurably changed. Just one quick thought on Tom's question about strengthening Excelsior. Because these incentives for selected projects that are generating a lot of good jobs are, in effect, self-funded. They're performance-based, as you said. If we had a more aggressive investment tax credit, I think we would restore some of the leverage that Empire Zone gave us. We've really gone from a maximum of 10% ITC down to our regular 4 or 5%, and Excelsior is only 3%, although it's casual. So if we could make the Excelsior cumulative with the regular investment tax credit, I think businesses would feel like the playing field was a little more level vis-a-vis our surrounding competitors. So I would urge you, and Senator Bonsack might want to take a note too, to look at restoring a little more aggressive investment tax credit, particularly in this economy, which, as we all know, needs a good push.
It's a great suggestion, and the timing is really good because just internally at Empire State Development, we're pulling ideas in from our regional offices and from our colleagues for our own kind of legislative proposals for next year. And so that's a really very helpful suggestion. And I just would footnote it. I visited a company at Senator Bonsack's urging last week that was damaged by the flooding, a manufacturing company, and I was struck by the amount of their capital investment that was spent in New York State. In other words, they bought heavy equipment, machinery, specialty tools, and things like that. And I always look around and look on the nameplate, like where's that machine made, and who's the consultant that did the wiring, and who's it? And he kept telling me, reeling off names and names, and I mean, their aluminum came from Alcoa, in Messina, and so on and so forth. So if you have more, again, in a tough economy like this, I think we lose sight of the fact that often if we can incentivize capital investment by local companies, whether we tell them to or not, just by the nature of who's in the New York economy, that capital spend is here in so many cases. It's not like they're taking advantage of a tax credit and spending the money and importing equipment from China. I mean, some of that may happen, but a lot more local equipment, for example, is made here. And it's certainly on the real estate side, right? The building, the renovation, it's all local. So there's a lot of, I'm really glad you brought it up. Lance? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Ward, I think you're giving me the hook. I know a hook when I see it, and Brooklyn, we're much more aggressive with the hook, but I thank him anyway.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks again to our sponsor, Sound of Life. Appreciate it very, very much. See you next month for the Kingston Herald debate.